This world called Tannerland is different from the planet Earth, when the Emperor's heart is burned here. Someone who has defied fate will arrive in this land. A prophecy of a supernatural being came to Tannerland, and the ruler of the Lin Empire supported 5 sons, 7 daughters, and confidants to summon this supernatural being, but when he performed the summoning, he saw an ordinary guy in front of him. He was shocked that this was actually the person from the prophecy, since he had wasted his timid. It was not a deity, but an innocent child. He summoned an ordinary earthly guy and got angry, ordering him to get out of here. Sunan found himself all alone in an unknown land. Sometime earth walls of the Lazan Palace were stained with blood, and the Emperor begged for the supernatural deity to hear his call. A huge monster appeared next to him, but Sean was not afraid of it and swung his sword, activating conquer the sky and rumble the mountains. He easily defeated the monster, and lest Stad cursed because the protagonists dealt with these creatures too easily. These monsters were so dangerous because they did not obey the laws of this world. But for Xian, this was not a problem, because he was also not from this world. He was called the Unearthly Savior, and he announced that the powerful ability to summon creatures from another world was passed on only to the Lustin family, and also caused many deaths. Peaceful people suffered from the Emperor's tyranny, not to mention that Xian himself had to go through hell because of lust. Onad, the Emperor, decided that the one he summoned to this world was good for nothing, and got rid of him by putting him in the dungeon. He barely managed to escape, and years have passed since then, and he ended up here. He lived every month in the hope of one day raising the sword of justice. Over Lad's head he pointed the blade at him, warning him that his titani had come to an end. Now he was going to return Alth. Desperate pain and indignation of his fallen comrades, he swung, and Lustina only managed to curse, realizing fate for writhing would have been different if not for this damned prophecy. The next moment, a cut had already pierced his body, and he fell, and Xian put the sword back in its sheath. He looked at Lad's bloody body, finally realizing that it was all over. He sighed in relief, and at that moment he heard someone call out to him. He was glad when he realized it was Lavina, and she was happy since he had finally defeated the Emperor. She congratulated him, and the protagonist agreed with this, admitting that it was not easy. He hugged her, smiling happily since everything was behind him, and now there was nothing more to worry about. He was going to do everything to make Elva happy, and she wanted to answer him. Butch did not have time, because Lil Steam noticed that this was not all because they had to burn the Emperor's heart in order to get rid of the monsters. He thought that Sahan would not be able to do anything, but it turned out that he was capable of many things. That is why he did not cease to amaze him, and the protagonist joyfully shouted his name, and his other comrades praised him for his excellent work, but noted that he could disappear if they burn at the Emperor's heart. However, Sion was summoned by the hearts of his confidants, not the Emperor, and some of his comrades did not think that he could return to his world. This meant that the Emperor had summoned his killer, and this seemed to the protagonist's comrades. He suddenly asked them to listen to him, but before he finished, Elva sadly asked if Harali did not want to go home. He confirmed it because he had already made his decision. His deceased comrades, close friends, and the person he loved more than his life were in this world. He would be lying if he said he didn't miss land at all, but he didn't regret his choice to stay here, because it was here that everything he held dear was. Severian looked at him happily after these words, and Lilin noticed that Sean would not change his mind. He confirmed this, and then turned around because someone called out to him. Elva kissed him, and he was surprised by such a sudden impulse, and she suddenly admitted that it was hard. Her tone changed, and the protagonist was surprised, and then felt an energy. Theteros behind him. He turned around, realizing that this was a dimensional portal, and warned the others to be more careful, because someone had opened a portal. However, his comrades did not react in any way, and he noticed the burnt heart of the Emperor in the palm of one of his friends. He understood what it was, and his comrades asked him if he didn't know that even if the entire Lad dynasty perished, the Emperor's heart would still be accessible, and they would be able to open a portal to another world. Now Lilin held the ashes outstretched, warning that Sion had come too strong. The other boys added that he was too popular, too beloved, and that meant that he would soon rise above them, and they did not need another emperor. The protagonist had saved this world, and for that they were immensely grateful to him. But it was time for him to return home. The future of this world was now in their hands, and they were not going to give power to an outsider like Xian. He was outraged that they would say something like that and turn it on. Elva begging her for help, however she did not move, and this only shocked him more. She was sure that he needed to make this decision himself, and he shouted her name and she apologized. Because she did not want to be the emperor's wife, but wanted to be the empress. She did not want to be someone's decoration, but wanted decorations to lie at her feet. However, Sion was not fit to be her decoration, and so she approached him, running her finger along his chin. The protagonist still did not understand what was happening, and Lavina realized that it was not easy for him, but she decided to help him ease this pain. He tried to stop her, but she pushed him into the portal, telling him to return to his homeland. He, falling into the portal, saw the faces of his comrades for the last time and screamed. Soon, the energy off, the portal dissipated. The world was saved by the hero from another world and his Sixilies. A little later, they announced that the savior had fulfilled his role. They accepted his desire to return to Tohei's homeland, and were ready to take care of the future of the empire, confident that their savior Xian would be proud. Optim. The emperor's reign was over, and now the empire could rely on them. The era of the 6 emperors was about to begin, and the people rejoiced when they heard this speech. Taxes were lowered in the empire, and the people were freed from hard work. The 6 emperors were in agreement, and ruled the land of Tanner wisely. It was a carefree time. But some time later, the energy corresponding to the portal between dimensions rose in this world again. One day Alita walked out of her house, humming softly to herself. She admired how blue the sky was, and not a cloud in it, and assumed that no was the time to plow the field. She smiled happily, walked to her plot, and began to work. However, some time later, she was distracted because she heard some sound. A flounder fell near her, and she was very surprised, and then rejoiced that it was really alive. Flounder. It was delicious, but she realized that she couldn't eat it because she didn't even know where the fish came from. The fish couldn't do anything in the forest, so Alita put the flounder aside, deciding to continue working. But before she could get back to her work, something else fell behind her, and it was much heavier than the fish, so a cloud of dust rose in the air. She turned around in fear, and saw a pig that had fallen to the ground with such force that it had made a dent underneath. Alita didn't understand what had happened, but she assumed that all these animals were falling from the sky, and then she saw Sean, who was also falling from the sky, screaming because I was completely naked. Alita frowned, but didn't have time to react in any way because the main character fell to the ground, raising a cloud of dust when it gradually dissipated. Alita was surprised that after the pig, a naked man fell. She was worried about Sion's condition as he fell headfirst on the ground and ran closer to him. However, he was alive and looked around, paying attention to the place he was in. Alita was surprised by such a reaction, but greeted Xian and hillowed happily, as after so many years, he finally succeeded and turned. However, the next moment he fell unconscious on the ground, and Alita asked herself in confusion, what was that? Sometime later, when it was already night outside, the protagonist abruptly opened his eyes, surprised that he was somewhere in the house. Alita noticed that he was already awake, and handed him the porridge she had prepared. She was curious about his well-being, because she did not expect him to fall from the sky. He realized that she had saved him, but he screamed. His whole body ached. The side effects were more severe than he thought, so he assumed he had miscalculated. Alita. He was a foreigner, as the way he spoke was the unofficial language of the land of Tanner. She assumed he was from some native tribe, although she noted that he was too pure for such a person. Xian suddenly realized that Hugh was not actually on Earth, and began to speak in another language, asking if Alita had saved him. She confirmed this and realized that he was not from the tribe. The protagonist then asked where he was. She explained that they were north of Mount Dylan, about hours from Goron village. Sean did not know where all of this was, and Alita suggested that they start by saying that they were in the Lilin Empire. It was a territorial unit formed by Emperor Lilith after the hero family revolution. The protagonist noticed that this was the Lilin Empire, which meant that he had pummed the emperor. He called him names, and for a while, both he and Alita were silent, and eventually, Xian asked her for some clothes, and she decided to give it to him soon. She began to feed him, and he emptied several bowls of food and thou. He noticed a strong fishy smell. He decided that nothing could be done about it, and assumed that there were spices here. He was glad that he finally returned, and suddenly he realized that he forgot to thank Alatan thanked her for the food. She was surprised by this, and then continued to observe the protagonist, noticing that he had a lean, muscular body, sharp facial features, and he behaved very rudely with her, for she assumed that he was from the nobility, but did not understand why, in this case, he did not have clothes. He suddenly realized that he had completely forgotten to ask the name of his savior, and Alita was surprised that he decided to ask about it now, but still said her name, adding that she was an ordinary village girl. Xian was surprised by this because he noticed that she was a swordswoman, and quite an experienced one at that. She did not understand why he decided this, and he honestly admitted that he simply assumed it since everything was too difficult to explain. Alita did not argue with the fact that she was a swordsman and owned a weapon, but she was not part of the knightly squad. Free swordsmen like her did not work for the emperor and technically lived off of individual orders. Personally, she was engaged in plant growing when there was no other work. The protagonist understood everything and Sudley asked what her relationship was to Emperor Lord. Alita froze, after which jerked sharply, knocking over the table. On Xian, he screamed, and she grabbed a dagger, jumping over the tableline, ordered to attack him, but he was no longer there, so she was very surprised. The protagonist appeared behind her, noting that he did not ask for a fight, and Alita asked in confusion how he got there. She turned around trying to attack him, but he easily dodged, and she assumed that he was also a swordsman. After that, she struck again, and Xian dodged again, and this happened several more times, but he still tried to convince Alita that he was not going to fight. He offered to talk, but she did not stop drawing attention to the fact that he was strong because he easily dodged her blows. In this case, it was necessary to speed up, and she really did it, but her blows still did not touch Xian, and he realized that she was not as meek as she seemed. However, she had a good heart, since she aimed for the shoulders and did not want to kill him. Another blow aimed at him. He stopped with a spoon, and Alita was especially surprised by this, fell to the ground, and Xian simply smiled, and eventually she gave in. She wondered who he was, and he introduced himself, saying that he came from Earth. Her eyes widened, assuming that he was the savior from another world. The protagonist was surprised that anyone still remembered him, and noted that he understood perfectly well why she attacked him. He asked her what the tyrant was to her, and he himself would have been offended if someone had asked him that. However, he was simply asking, so she did not have to answer. Still, she gave her full name, Ethor Bella Lad Lasan, admitting that she was the daughter of Emperor Lad. She remembered some time ago the rebellious people shouted that the reign of the tyrant emperor had come to an end, ordering a thirst to destroy the imperial family. They were not going to let the emperor's offspring ascend to the throne, and a thought time, Serafina apologized to Karen, saying that he was the only one she could rely on. He wanted to tell her something, but he paused for a moment, and then promised that he would protect the child with his own life. Alita, who was still very young at the time, looked at her mother desperately. After that, their bodyguard Karen took care of her, raised her away from people, and taught her how to fight. He was just doing his duty, but when her identity was accidentally revealed, he had to leave the empire. Alita lived here since then, but sometimes she went outside the villa ghetto, run an errand. If she ran out of money, Sean realized that this was why she lived in such a remote place, and had never thought that he would meet the emperor's daughter. He assumed that he was her father's enemy, but Alita Nollinger had any relation to him because he was dead. And yet people were still afraid that someone would take his place. Members of the imperial family were able to open dimensional portals, so they were hunted, and she thought that Sean was the killer. The protagonist was angry that his former comrades thought that he wanted to get rid of the emperor's relatives, but did not bother to check this, and simply lied to him. The more he learned about what happened, the angrier became, but he was sure that Alita should not be sad, although it was not easy for her now, since sometimes good people like him fell from the sky. Alita did not answer, and then she asked with disbelief if he was really a savior from another world. She heard that after killing the emperor he returned to Earth, and so she did not understand how he managed to get to Tanner. In addition, she wondered why he returned without clothes, and Sean shouted that such things are not under his control. The whole thing was later that only a living organism can pass through the portal, and not in strange fetishes. When he got here for the first time, he was also naked, and even when he returned to Earth years ago in the middle of Guangweiman Square, everything was the same. He did not even want to remember this, and Alita was interested in what he said about Guangwaman, since she did not know about it. Finally, she realized that he returned to Earth years ago and came to Tanner at someone's call. She could not believe that someone could summon a person from another world, since no one except the Imperial family was capable of this. The protagonist explained that if you think about it like that, then it was him, because he returned on his own. Alita was shocked that he called himself and did not understand if this was possible. Of course it was not easy, and Sean needed years, although he did not do it entirely on his own. Suddenly his eyes widened, turning around sharply, and Alita wondered what was going on. He remembered that she had said that she was being pursued because she had Thimperer's blood in her, which allowed her to summon beings from another world. This was indeed true, and suddenly cursed Bess. He realized that he had been mistaken. He, noticing Alit's lack of understanding, explained that in order to get to Tanner, he needed to find a magical support for safe travel. He used the power of the Emperor's relatives, while were able to open a spatial portal, and Alita had the purest blood. Then she realized that this was why he asked her what her relationship was to the Emperor. In other words, the protagonist used Hera as a converter, and this meant that everyone would see that she had summoned him with magic. Alita was horrified, assuming that this could not be, and then stood up abruptly, approaching the window, and noticed the torches of the approaching people, not understanding how this was possible. And when they had time, the knights were already near her house. The clan announced that they had detected traces of magic here, and he was sure that it was coming from the hut. He assumed that everyone was ready for a siege, and attracted the attention of the knight Xenon's stride. He decisively thanked him for his help, and Thénardier everyone to prepare for an invasion, as well as to stay close during the encirclement of the building. Side watching everything that was happening, Side and Alita, coming closer to him, resolutely stood up, clutching a sword in her hands. The protagonist noticed that she was already accustomed to difficulties, and assumed that she had been preparing for this her entire life. He felt sorry for her being forced to suffer because of him, because she hid for so many years, and now everything was revealed in his thoughts. She was cursing at him because she had gotten caught because of him. He assumed that she was very angry even if she did not show it, and so he asked her not to be afraid, to speak up if she really wanted to say something. Alita looked at him in surprise, and then thanked him for warning her about the siege in advance. This greatly surprised Zan, and he asked again in shock. But before Alita could swear, the knights began shouting, ordering her to show herself, because if she did, her hut would be blown to pieces. Xenon suggested that the clan start with a light attack, and he cast a spell called the Burning Pike. A powerful flame engulfed the house, and Xenon was very surprised, assuming that this was too powerful an attack since they had Tobering Alita alive. The clan explained that the fire was only that strong outside, so she would not be harmed. Beautif. She was unlucky. She would be left with several burns. The knights near the house looked at the flames and Shotan. The next moment, Alita jumped out of it, and they ran to attack. Noticing her, whoever could catch Alita could get gold coins. However, before the knights got close, she swung her sword, inflicting wounds on them, and everyone realized that she was a swordsman. However, Alita realized that there were too many knights, so she would not be able to fight back. She flinched as the attack flew towards her, and from this, she had to jump back. Xenon was outraged that Alita, whom he called a name, dared to kill a normal soldier. He assumed that she should be very ashamed, and promised that he would take revenge on her for this. She was scared, noticing that he had magical armor, because it meant that Hua's a level stronger than her. Xenon launched an attack, and she barely dodged. She managed to avoid another blow as well, and found the right time to attack, striking, but the armor where she struck glowed, reflecting the attack. Xenon noticed that she had a high-level sword, but his equipment was also stronger and more durable than Alita thought, and Sasek others would not work against him. He struck, throwing her aside, and she coughed. Blood sprayed from her mouth, and the force of her landing on the ground caused dust to rise into the air. Xeno frowned, displeased by how dusty it wasn't. Alita was surprised by his strength, and noticed that her arm was broken. Xeno warned her that if she really was a swordsman, she should know that she did not stand a chance. He wanted to tell her what would happen if she simply laid down her weapon, but before he could finish, she gave up. He thought it was Agarat's decision, and was glad that she understood quickly. He wanted to continue his speech, but suddenly, someone called out to him. Sion was unhappy that Xenon had been so heartless all this time, and now he decided to pity Alita. He felt like his mood was changing too quickly, and Xenon was very surprised to see him. He wondered who the protagonist was. He was so close, but he did not sense his presence.